There's no doubt about it that over the past 11 years, The Walking Dead has been one of the most popular shows on the planet. After beginning their 10th season in 2019, they recently just concluded it here in 2021, and they do have a final season due to come out later this year. But now that we have finished season 10, it is a perfect time to do a big ranking of all of the seasons, starting from the worst and going to the best. Just before we get into it, I'd like to say that this will contain spoilers and that this list is just my opinion. I don't expect many to agree with it because I also haven't read the comics, so I don't have that source material to look to. So please don't attack me, but anyways, let's get into it. Coming in at last and 10th place is Season 8. Too much actually happens in this season for my liking, but yet it still feels really slow and boring. To be fair, there is a lot of action in this season, and we get to see an interesting point of view where we see what the Sanctuary is thinking whenever they're trying to plan a battle or in between a battle. But overall, so many characters just felt so irrelevant this season. As they are in a big community and there are several communities, they do just have too many characters, and because there is so much going on, they're not really prioritizing developing any characters. We're kind of just leaving them with what they already have. So some scenes you'll see someone who you haven't seen for a couple of episodes and you actually completely forgot about them. But even the dialogue is at its all-time worst here, so even when they do try to develop some, it's really poor and makes some characters that we've liked become a bit annoying. A lot of people think this show gets too much hate, and the reason they say that is because people only hate on it because of Carl's death. I personally thought it was fine. It did a solid job of doing that. They could have done it better, but it's not the reason why this is in last place. I just really had a hard time watching this. I found it a bit of a chore to watch as the characters aren't really interesting this season and they're not too likable and they just didn't feel like themselves. And also another con is that this show is obviously about the zombie apocalypse, but here, even though it takes a turn for its future, it focuses a lot more on human characters and rivalries rather than any Walker stuff. They felt near to non-existent in this season, so for me it was a no-brainer to have this one in last place. Coming in at 9th place is Season 7. This is where they started paving the path for the future of this show and introduced many communities and groups. All those things were very necessary, but the way it was executed and what we had to sit through, it was very long and boring. It slows down so much to a point that we've never experienced in this show. Sometimes we've had slow patches, but here this whole season, especially in the middle, feels very, very slow, which is frustrating because this season kicked off with perhaps one of the most stressful episodes where we had to say goodbye to Abraham and Glenn. This really establishes a really good villain in Negan and shows that even characters that have been with us from the beginning, like Glenn, they're not safe. As much as you want to hate Negan for what he's done, he's got such this charisma and character about him that it's hard not to like him. He brings some comedy to the show, which lightens the mood after this really depressing start. But overall, this season is where the show started to dip in form. In joining a community, we're introduced to so many new characters that they try and give an arc for each one of them. It just takes up too much time and it's really exhausting, but as I said, it was very necessary with some of the elements they are going for what the show is today. But there are a lot of things which just were very boring, slow, and it weighed this season down to be one of the worst for me. Coming in at 8th place is Season 10. Now, just to clarify, this is a lot better than Season 7 and 8, but it's still not a fantastic season. It was very inconsistent. I'll talk about it in a bit, but Season 9 really revived this show, and this does continue from that season, but it just slows down to a point where when it does start to gain momentum, it feels a bit weird. The Negan plotline throughout this season was by far the most interesting and the best, where you couldn't tell, judging by his past, whether he was going to side with Alpha or with our group. And when you do think he sides with Alpha, the shocking reveal when he ends up slicing her throat and turns out he was being a man on the inside the whole time. I mentioned that in the previous seasons they have tried to develop every single character's arc. Here they only take the ones who are very necessary to the story and develop them nicely. Some people suffer from that and they don't really get shown on screen much, but I didn't mind that. I thought it was good because it didn't waste a lot of time. Alpha was once again brilliant, and as I said, she ends up getting her throat sliced, which led for Beta to take over, who, once that happened, it got a bit silly with how he could hit Alpha in his head and carried around the zombified Alpha head. This season also added 6 bonus episodes starting a couple of months ago, which ended the other day. They didn't really add much except for that final episode where we got Negan's backstory, so I thought that was a very good episode, but other than that, the rest of it was really irrelevant and you didn't need to wait that long for it, so that too does weigh this season down a tiny bit, but even so, it was always going to stay in this position for me. Coming in at 7th place is Season 9. I mentioned this season is where the show got sort of revived, injected with this sense of freshness. I think that's largely helped halfway through the season. I think that's helped largely when they do that time jump, because it allows for your characters and locations to change up so much without it feeling out of the blue. It makes sense. It was a smart decision. We got a good and interesting send-off for Rick, which questions haven't been answered yet. I guess that'll be revealed in the movie. We are introduced to the Whisperers, who were another great set of villains. One of them also being Alpha, who was one of the best villains on this entire show for me. I always found Henry quite annoying, but since the time jump, he started to have an interesting arc, especially with Lydia. But then once I started to really become intrigued in his character, there was a really shocking ending. Him and a lot of others were executed and their heads were put on a pole. So it was a very emotional ending to that season where I was completely in shock. So this season was a little bit light on action, but that finale, it really made us sure that that wasn't what the future was planning ahead as it got more gory. Other than that, it was a good season. It was hard to find many faults, but I do believe that the quality and consistency wasn't there from earlier seasons, although a lot better than it has been in recent years. But overall, a good revival of this show. Coming in at 6th place is Season 2. Now, I'm just going to say it straight away. I know people criticize this season heavily. A lot of people I know, they've always said this was a really boring season, and I can acknowledge that there are very boring things. However, I found it very, very watchable and entertaining to me. Maybe because it was so early on in the show, but I do believe that this season gets a lot more hate than it deserves. It follows some new interesting ideas following on from Season 1, and I know maybe they could have explored more rather than staying in the farm for 12 episodes. That I get why people criticize it, but I still think the quality and the drama was there. There wasn't too much zombie action, but when it was here, it had some shocking moments with Dale, with Sophia. It was more of a drama season with zombies sprinkled into it, with the love triangle, which made for one of the most interesting character stories in the whole show, with Shane literally carrying this season on his shoulders. I personally really did enjoy Shane's character, even though he's meant to be this dislikable person, but what he brought to the show was very unique, and I would have actually liked to see him carry on for more seasons, but I feel like the way that it panned out, it would have been forced to keep him on, so I really did enjoy that character, even though he wasn't in it for too long. But overall, I do think this season is criticized a lot more than it deserves to be, and it does contain a lot of character development, although I can understand why people find it a bit slow. Coming in at 5th place is Season 1. Yeah, I know people also criticize this season compared to all the other ones we've got because the budget isn't there, the quality isn't there, and it's short. You know, it's only like 6 episodes long, but I like to say it's short and sweet. It really does introduce us to this outbreak in a nice way, and I liked how we were really confused along with Rick. The characters, they weren't really developed that much this season, but you could see elements which you would find them interesting in seasons later on when they can get developed with, you know, longer seasons, which does happen. But this season is held back from the fact that, as I said, it couldn't do too much in the amount of episodes it did have, and maybe the budget wasn't there exactly, but it did a really good job, I thought, in starting off this show and establishing the tone. A negative which you really do notice though, looking back at it, is the walkers, because I know there was some behind the scenes stuff about the showrunner and if they wanted to stay accurate to the comics, but the walkers could do things that they can't nowadays, so stuff like that's noticeable, but it didn't really bother me as much. Even though it had its limitations compared to other seasons, I still think it is quite a good season. Coming in at 4th place is Season 6. I really did like the rivalry between Alexandria and the Saviors. The tension was high during a lot of this season, especially when walkers ended up breaching the walls of Alexandria and you're faced with all these people who haven't really had to fight walkers in a long time because they've been so safe. That episode alone was one of the best in this entire series and a great mid-season finale. There are slow patches during this season as our characters do settle down, but they don't bother me too much because it made sense. You know, they're finally safe for once. They don't have to keep watching their back, even though they do have those problems of settling in, which I really did like as well because it made sense. There are some fantastic and tense moments throughout all of this season and a big build up to this Negan character who we do see at the end, who makes his presence known immediately. And I did really feel for our group a lot this season as they did get captured quite a lot. You know, only escaped narrowly, and also by the finale it was made clear that I should have been scared. Coming in at third place is Season 4. There are quite a lot of cool ideas that are introduced in this season, but there are also quite a few average episodes, and we hadn't really been used to too many average episodes in this show so far, but that is all made up for with my personal favourite episode of the entire show. A lot of people will agree. Our team gets separated into small groups. We get to see characters who didn't really have the most screen time get to develop themselves and their relationships with certain people that they maybe hadn't been with before. The season started off with this sickness storyline, which then also led to someone burning the bodies of these sick people, which created this air of mystery around the prison. And sticking with the prison, we got a fantastic battle there, which is what my favourite episode is. It was filled with great dialogue with Rick's speech. It was filled with great action with the tank and the walkers breaching the prison, but it was also filled with high emotion as before the battle commenced, Herschel was decapitated. It was such a strong beginning with the episode and was on track to be one of my favourites, but then it really does slow down in the second half of the season, unfortunately, until the end where my excitement was increased for Season 5. Coming in at second place is Season 5. As I mentioned, Season 4 ended in a way which had me really excited for this season, and it did not disappoint with its beginning with the battle at Terminus with the cannibals. We got a lot of gore with that, but then that did continue throughout this whole season, which led to a really gory death with Noah, which was sad, and especially the way it happened because it could have so easily been prevented. Carol had always been quite a side character. If you watch this show now, you know she's one of the main characters, but here she really does start to get that development into a more interesting and more of a main character. So her, amongst others, did get quite a good amount of character growth. We were also introduced to the communities, well, at least one or two, so I thought that was good, and it really came into it very nicely how they would progress with these communities going forward with the show. But it was frustrating as well at times, especially with this hospital storyline, which was so out of the blue, and they devoted many episodes to it for it to all have been pointless when they just kill off Beth anyway, because that was the whole point of what they were doing, was to kill off Beth. But I would have preferred it to be done in a different way personally. So overall, this was a really, really good season filled with plenty of action, and it was laying the seeds for a promising future. Maybe controversial, but coming in at first place is Season 3. I really liked the prison, the change of location to there. I just thought it was fantastic. It was finally a place which it felt very clever and you could do a lot with it. So many iconic characters got introduced. Just to name a few, Michonne, the governor, both very important for how this show goes on. More importantly, Michonne. But yeah, that governor, a very crazy person. Obviously one of the best villains we've had in this show. And it's interesting to see how crazy he was given how early on in the show this was, and like how long they've actually been in this apocalypse for. But unfortunately we had to say goodbye to some characters as well, like T-Dog, Laurie, Mel and Andrea. I know many people, me included, didn't really like Andrea in this show. As I said in the intro, I haven't read the comics, but apparently she's one of the main characters here, and this show just didn't do her justice at all. But I think she got at least a nice send-off. Thus far, the action was at its peak. Obviously it does change later on, but it was very, very good then. And you start to see why you really, really do have trust issues in the apocalypse, because there are so many backstabs, so many people you can't trust, and it does develop those trust issues. Just there were some nice character moments. I liked Merle reconnecting with his brother before, unfortunately, he had to die. Rick suffers the loss of Laurie and goes on a full rampage, but then does show a bit of mercy when he welcomes Woodbury's people into the prison. Yeah, just overall, I know it may be a controversial pick because many people didn't like this season as much because it differs too much from the comics. I haven't read the comics, so it didn't bother me as much, and I really did enjoy this season, hence why it's in first place. So that was my ranking of all 10 Walking Dead seasons. Look, I know it's probably controversial, some of my picks. Majority of the time, a load of people's lists are going to be controversial, but this is just my opinion, so please let me know what your ranking would be down below. I'm really interested to see. If you want to see a more in-depth review of season 10 of The Walking Dead, I'll leave a clickable card up here for when I did review it yesterday or the day before. I don't know when this video is going out. But anyways, I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in my later videos.